Am I good to go? Oh, no, I don't need an intro. I just meant, am I good to go?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, cool. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So, thank you, everybody, for coming to this talk. I suppose you had to come to this talk because I'm on the schedule, but thank you for turning up and not walking in the sunshine. So here we are. I just arrived, so I don't actually know what else has been said today. So maybe I'm saying the same thing. But isn't it wonderful to be here to remember our teacher, Rob Nairn? And I think it's really lovely him being honoured with a kata in a traditional way. Because Rob was an interesting place. You know, he wasn't a lama, which was such a strength because he could connect to us beyond any barriers of robes or deference. But also when he died, it was kind of strange for me too, because there was part of you that kind of wanted him to have this real reverence as a Buddhist teacher with like a something special, something to acknowledge that he was a special human being or as special as all of us are. So I think this weekend's really nice because it kind of acknowledges that yeah, Rob was, you know, a Westerner and not a Lama, but he was our teacher. And for so many of us, he was the bridge to the Guru. You know, so many of us met the Dharma and met these teachings through Rob Nairn. And as I said at his funeral, they say that in many ways the Guru is even more important than the Buddha because the Guru introduces you to the Buddha. And I think, well, what about the person who introduces you to the Guru? Maybe they're really important too, and that's what Rob was. You know, it was such a vital part in all of our lives, or so many of our lives. So when I was preparing for this talk, I thought what I'd like to do is create a talk based on quotes that Rob had given. So I trawled through my books and through conversations we'd had, and almost every slide is kind of based on a quote from Rob. So we'll be looking at dreams and death and nightmares and the shadow, but we'll be looking at through the frame, the kind of lens of Rob Nairn, because everything that I learnt was through him. So much of my work has been shaped by his. So Rob Nairn on sleep, dreams and death. So we'll see how this goes. If there are too many slides and it gets boring, I'll just stop the slides because I already feel limited having to do this all the time. I'd like to leave time at the end to do something practical so that we're not just sitting here listening, but we'll see how the slides go on. So the first thing I want to look at is actually not dreams, it's nightmares and the shadow. Because for me, this was really my way in for the lucid dreaming that eventually became the kind of dream yoga practices. The real way into Dharma through lucid dreaming with me was through Rob Nairn, and you'll see why in a minute when I share this dream. So, what is the shadow? Rob described the shadow as all the aspects of ourselves that we don't want to face. So the shadow was a term popularized by the legendary Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, used to describe the parts of the mind that we have rejected, denied, and disowned. He referred to it as the dark side of the human psyche, but not dark meaning bad or evil, dark meaning yet to be illuminated. And as mindfulness practitioners, anyone who sat for more than 5 minutes, more than 5 seconds in my case, will have come face to face with their shadow. Because isn't mindfulness such a wonderful way to release that suppression that prevents the things we have been repressing, denying, and disowning from coming into conscious awareness? So as mindfulness practitioners, we will meet our shadow, absolutely. And Rob was really interested in how the shadow could appear in our dreams, because the shadow by its very nature is outside of conscious awareness. So until we do stuff to dip down into the unconscious mind, for many of us, the shadow, we can't see it. But our dreams reveal the shadow, and especially our nightmares. So Rob loved nightmares. You know, I remember him, one of the first retreats I went to with Rob, was it called like Whaley Bridge? Whaley Bridge, that was it. And I arrived late with my mum, and one of the first things I heard Rob say was someone asked him how he slept the next day. And he said, I slept wonderfully, I had some wonderful nightmares. And I thought, like, how does this guy think good sleep is having nightmares? Like, this is nuts, right? And then the more I got to know him, I knew that, yeah, for Rob, you know, having nightmares was so great because it revealed the content of his shadow to him. So nightmares can be really instructive, really wonderful tools to see how our mind is working. In I found this recently. So on the 8th of January 2008, I went to sleep after reading Rob Nairn's letter asking me to teach lucid dreaming sometime in the future. So I met Rob when I was about 21, and Rob was on email, but as you know, Rob was never really on email, even in the email age, right? So we were kind of pen pals, and I would write him letters, and he would basically give me instructions on lucid dreaming, and what I later learned was essentially dream yoga through these letters. And in one of them, I remember clearly he said, Charlie, you have to teach. Sometime in the future, you have to teach. And I remember thinking, maybe in like 10 or 20 years' time, I'll be able to give workshops and stuff. And actually, this was January the 8th, 2008, and I gave my first workshop, or first talk, alongside Rob Nairn on Halloween 2008. So he worked quickly. I didn't think it would be that quick. And this dream, so the night I went to sleep after reading that letter, I had the first time that I integrated a shadow element in a lucid dream. And this is what I talk about in my first TED talk, actually, because I was having, once I knew that Rob was taking some interest in my capacity for lucid dreaming, I started to get really puritanical about my lucid dreams. And anytime something violent appeared in the lucid dream or something sexual, I'd essentially try and repress it or suppress it in the lucid dream, which would mean either fighting it or pushing it away or trying to wake myself up. And I remember very proudly telling Rob that whenever something aggressive or frightful appeared in my lucid dreams, I would turn myself into Wolverine. You know, the comic book character who has knife things coming out of his hands, and I'd chop them into pieces. And I remember he gave me this look that only your mum or your spiritual teacher will ever give you, this look of kind of I love you, but you're an idiot. He said, Charlie, I advise you to do precisely the opposite of what you have been doing. What you are encountering in your nightmares and your lucid nightmares is shadow content. You must embrace the shadow. So I'm 21, 22 at this time, and I don't really know what the shadow is. I've heard about it, but I'm not kind of really sure what it is, but I know that it's something we've got to embrace. So a couple of weeks later, I'm having a dream, and it's nightmarish, and I become lucid in this dream. I don't know whether I've got it here in the next slide. No. So I become lucid, and there's these 3 people coming towards me, and I become lucid, and they're mocking me. I say, I'm dreaming, you can't hurt me. And they go, it doesn't matter that you're dreaming, we can still hurt you. And I was like, oh God, this is terrible, this is so scary. So I thought, I get ready to defend myself and to fight them. And at this point, they coalesce into kind of one thing, so it's this kind of 3-headed monster. And just before I go to fight this shadow representation, what have I repressed, denied, and disowned? Violence, aggression, sexuality, perhaps. I remembered Rob's teachings to embrace the shadow. So I run towards this thing and I hug it. And I thought you'd kind of hug it and it would dissolve into light or something and you just wake up, but it didn't. It was struggling. And I was holding. I think, just trust Rob, embrace the shadow, something will happen. And as I did it, it's kind of released in my embrace. I felt its kind of tension release, this dream character. And when I removed my embrace, I was hugging myself. This exact carbon copy of me, but I was kind of like a silver sheen. I don't know, strange, but kind of metallic. And this version of me looked at the dream me and just went, like that. And I woke up. And when I woke up, I had this big rush of energy, really felt something had been released in my body, but I didn't know what. And a couple of months later, I was able to see Rob in person. I had proudly told him about this dream. And I said, and I embrace it. Then it turned into me. And I said, so Rob, was that me embracing my shadow? And he went, absolutely. But you're crazy, man. I didn't mean literally hug the thing. And I was like, what do you mean? You said embrace the shadow. He said, embrace the shadow is a psychological term in which you turn to face that which we are unwilling to face. Wow. So in my naivety, I had literally hugged it. But actually, he said, you know what? This is great. Because the unique thing about the lucid dream state, a dream where you know that you're dreaming as you're dreaming, is the fact that psychological concepts become personified. So you can literally meet your fear. You can meet your fear of rejection, as I've done once. You can meet your shadow, and they appear in these personified forms, which you can touch, you can dialogue with, You can actually ask, how can you help? You can hug them. So actually embracing your shadow, literally hugging your shadow, is something I've now been telling people to do for like 15 years. Rob always viewed nightmares as something not to be turned away from. Again, as I said earlier, he said nightmares are such good news. He said, earlier he said, I've had a wonderful night full of nightmares. Rob believed that nightmares were such good news because they revealed our shadow to us. Most of us do not like our nightmares. We assume that our nightmares are a sign of a broken mind, a sign of spiritual failure, or a sign possibly that we are re-traumatized or still traumatized. In fact, in almost all cases, nightmares are playing a curative role, and they're really trying their best to help us. So I want to offer you 3 reframes on nightmares that I learned from Rob. So the first one is that a nightmare is a dream that is shouting. A nightmare is a dream that is shouting. It is shouting for our attention. Why? Because the shadow wants to be integrated by its nature. The psyche is looking for balance. Again, this is what our mindfulness practice is doing, right? It's bringing us back into balance. So Rob believed that a nightmare was shouting for our attention. It was saying, hey, over here, unintegrated shadow material, over here, unintegrated trauma, daddy issues, sexuality was calling for our attention over here. A nightmare wasn't trying to hurt us, it was trying to warn us. A nightmare is a bit like pain. Pain is a wonderful thing because without pain, we wouldn't have the signal needed to start the healing process. If we bump into something and we hit our arm, pain is used to send a message from the body to the brain saying a wound has occurred, send help. Either rub it or put lotion on it or, fix the arm in some way. Without pain, we wouldn't know that. And the nightmare is like that. It's like a pain response. It's sending a signal saying, here is a wounded part of the psyche. So thank goodness for nightmares because they point out unintegrated shadow material to us. Now, if a nightmare is a dream that is shouting, if we're really suffering with nightmares and we want to find some way to integrate them, the first thing we need to do is to tell the nightmare, okay, I'm listening. No need to shout. How? By writing our nightmares down, by discussing our nightmares, by sharing our nightmares with a trusted friend or therapist, drawing a picture for your nightmares, writing a poem to your nightmares, doing everything you can to say, I'm listening. No need to shout. When I first heard that teaching, it completely revolutionized my view of what a nightmare was. And rather than waking up and thinking they're a sign of some sort of moral failure, we can think, oh, thank you to my psyche for letting me know what parts I need to address. The second reframe, building on this, is that nightmares are a sign of a healing mind. I'm not saying that you have to have nightmares to heal, but in many ways, nightmares are the manifestation of a healing response. When we go through a traumatic situation, we are supposed to have nightmares about that traumatic situation as a way to integrate it. Nightmares are like an internal therapy session. This is why, of course, every time we wake from a nightmare, either intentionally or unintentionally, the nightmare has to recur. Who here has ever had a nightmare where they've been in the nightmare and while they're in it, they've gone, I've got to wake up. Anyone ever had that? Okay, so that was a lucid dream for a start. The moment you acknowledged there was a place to wake up to and you had the capacity to wake up, you acknowledged you were dreaming. So you were actually lucid there. But unfortunately, every time you wake yourself from a nightmare, the nightmare necessarily has to recur because it's like a therapy session cut short. This is why we have recurring nightmares. We don't have the phrase recurring happy dreams, right? Because if a dream was happy, we'd only need to have it once. The integration would occur in the moment. But dreams that have been cut short, these nightmares, these therapy sessions that have been interrupted, necessarily have to repeat. So in many ways, when we have nightmares, they're a sign that healing is happening. They're a sign that this internal therapist within our mind is doing its job. If the first reframe is looking at nightmares as pain, then this is a reframe looking at nightmares as a healing response, a bit like a scab. What is a scab? A scab is a protective barrier that forms over a wound to allow healing to occur beneath the surface. Couldn't we say the same of a nightmare? It is a manifestation of healing that occurs to protect the wound, allowing healing to occur beneath the surface. Rob was a fine example of how nightmares are a sign of healing. Because of course, when Rob had his dark night of the soul, where he was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder more than 40 years after the traumatic events that had happened to him, when he was conscripted into the Rhodesian army and forced to be part of a machine that was killing and seen so much killing as well. It was 40 years later that Rob was diagnosed with PTSD. And I remember him saying clearly, I'm glad that the nightmares are happening now. For Rob, having these nightmares about what happened to him 40 years was a sign that finally the healing was occurring. Not that he was being re-traumatized, but that finally, after all these years of subtle suppression, it was coming to the surface. And I remember him saying something to me, I think I've got this quote too. We were talking on Zoom or Skype, and Rob was really, really going through it. And I remember in the depth of his despair, really in the dark night of the soul, he said, at least this is happening now and not in the bardo. And I thought, wow. So, not in the bardo, in the after-death states. And I remember thinking, this is so interesting because what it's showing me is that like years of mindfulness practice didn't actually lead to the integration of some of this really deep trauma that occurred before his spiritual practice had begun in earnest. But what it did do is give him a view that was so wide that even in the depths of despair, he could have the presence of mind to go, well, at least it's happening now and not when I die. It was an amazing shift of perspective that I would never be able to have myself. Now, I think so many of us had this with Rob, these moments where he'd say something and you were like, how do you think like that? You know, moments where he would reveal the practices that he'd done, where you would see that, wow, this guy's mind is operating in a different level. So a sign of a healing mind in many ways, and an evolutionary advantage. This is cool. Rob didn't teach me this. It's just an interesting one that I knew he was always fascinated by. It's believed that nightmares of future events, so the first two reframes about integration of trauma, but nightmares of future events actually play an evolutionary role. There's a guy called Antti Ravonsi. He's a Finnish professor, and he studies nightmares, and he created something called threat simulation theory, which is that the reason we came to be top predator on the planet, apex predator as humans, was our ability to have nightmares. Because if you could have nightmares about future events, you were rehearsing your survival mechanisms in your sleep. For example, cave woman A and cave woman B. Cave woman A is dreaming about chilling out in the savannah every night. No nightmares. Cave woman B is dreaming about saber-toothed tigers every night. In some dreams, she's fighting them. In other dreams, she's running from them. In other dreams, she's hiding from them. 2 weeks later, cave woman A and cave woman B are on the savannah, and they meet a saber-toothed tiger. Who's more likely to survive? Cave woman B. She's been rehearsing her survival mechanisms throughout. So sometimes actually we have nightmares, not necessarily due to integration of past trauma, but in preparation for traumas that may occur to us. Not so that they do happen, but so like a fire drill, so that we're better prepared to deal with them should they happen. So again, in all cases, almost all cases, nightmares are playing a curative role. In fact, a study from Rush University in Chicago found that there was a correlation between people who were having nightmares about the traumatic event that had happened to them and how quickly they recovered from single event trauma depression. They were looking at people who were going through heartbreak, and they found that those people who were dreaming about the person who had broken their heart or the traumatic incident, like if they'd been in a car crash or something like that, actually got better quicker than those who didn't. Further adding to this science that having a nightmare is good for you. It's medicinal. It's a bitter medicine, horrible medicine. I've had terrible nightmares in my life. There's nothing fun about them. But in the same way as sometimes a one-on-one therapy session in the waking state is freaking horrible, isn't it? You don't want to be there, but God, the work is so powerful and it's doing so much. And some of our sits, when we sit and you're faced with your stuff and you don't want to be there and you want to do everything but get off the cushion, but we sit there because we know that this is allowing the release of material. So lucid dreaming. from nightmares to lucid dreaming because, of course, if we can become lucid in a nightmare, we have the possibility to transform it. And this is really where you start to bring the shadow work into the lucid dream state. This is one of my favorite quotes from Rob. There's no better way to show the mind how our concept of reality can be blown away than through practicing lucid dreaming. Those were the kind of quotes that Rob would just roll off his tongue in this kind of dramatic, theatrical way. In fact, I believe he may have been like sipping on a glass of dry white wine when he said that as well. You know, he had this way of just like hitting these mic drop moments, we'd say now. I don't think he'd get what that means, but you know, real mic drop moments of these quotes. So let's just have a quick look at lucid dreaming. So, well, what is a lucid dream? You tell me. This is the interactive bit. What's a lucid dream? A dream where you know that you're dreaming, yes. What else? Waking up in your dream, yes. What else?
Making decisions.
Yeah, so knowing that you're dreaming as you're dreaming and then making decisions in the dream. So being able to direct, to choreograph, to basically choose what you want to dream about. This is lucid dreaming. How does it work? Well, we know scientifically how it works. It's the reactivation of the prefrontal cortex while you're in the unconscious REM dreaming sleep state. So we could define lucid dreaming as the reactivation of self-reflective awareness within the seemingly unconscious rapid eye movement dreaming sleep state. What does that really mean? It means basically when you're dreaming, the front part of the brain, your prefrontal cortex, which is linked to self-assessment and agency and a sense of I am having an experience, is usually switched off. That's why you can dream such crazy things, right? So that's how you can have that dream that you're best friends with Beyonce, because the part of your brain that knows who you are is greatly decreased. When you become lucid, though, that part of the brain switches on. So now you're still dreaming, but you're going, oh, I know that I'm dreaming, and I can choose what to do. I can fly about, I can have sex with movie stars, or I can do my spiritual practice. I can do my shadow work. I can do my mindfulness practice within the lucid dream. You know, if you do happen to have a lucid dream tonight, which of course your chances have been greatly increased because many people find just hearing a talk on lucid dreaming is enough to tip them over. Do your mindfulness practice in your lucid dream tonight. It is an often mind-blowing experience. And I spoke to Rob about this once, and he was theorizing that, you know, when we practice in the waking state, we have two big barriers to entering that kind of clear light at the end of meditation. One is our body, our physical form, and the other is the ego mind, so attached to this physical form. Whereas when you meditate in the lucid dream state, you don't have a physical form. You have a dream body, a body that's made of chi, that's made of prana. So you have none of these kind of physical defilements that are getting in the way of the meditation. And the ego mind, although it's present because you're going, I am having a lucid dream, it's not running the show. It's riding shotgun. You know, it's not in the driving seat. The driving seat is still the unconscious mind, the dreaming mind. So do your meditation practice in your lucid dream. It's a very, very powerful experience. Really, yes, it is real, lucid dreaming. We do have all this scientific research on it. And in fact, I was part of a study that was published last year in June 2023, where we were using lucid dreaming to work with people, traumatized populations, some of whom were military veterans, but many of whom were not. And we found that lucid dreaming was a very powerful intervention for post-traumatic stress disorder. I wish Rob was around to see those results because so much of his work informed them. Also, Rob being a veteran himself, also being diagnosed with PTSD much later in life. There was so much of those studies that Rob linked into. But essentially, to summarize the study, and I have a new TED talk actually coming out this month, which is all about this. We had 55 people, all of whom had chronic post-traumatic stress disorder. And we know that lucid dreaming can be a very powerful intervention for nightmares. We've got decades of research on that, because you can become lucid in your nightmare and then know that there's no threat there, or you can change the nightmare to a peaceful ending, or you could choose to wake yourself up, which is like hitting the ejector seat. You have to have the nightmare again, but at least you're kind of out of that suffering and danger. We had 1 week to work with this group, to teach them lucid dreaming, and especially how to teach them how to use lucid dreaming to integrate their nightmares and to transform their trauma. So there are a lot of people there who are working with childhood sexual abuse, So their dream plan, their intention for what to do in the lucid dream was to call out to meet their inner child, the part of them that had been wounded by the childhood sexual abuse. And we found that created a buffer zone between the trauma and the interaction with the trauma that allowed them to integrate it at a very deep level. There were other people who are army veterans and armed forces veterans who were having recurring nightmares that they were back in Iraq. One guy was actually a Vietnam veteran, an older guy. And their lucid dream plan was once they became lucid in that nightmare, they would remind themselves, hang on, I'm not really back in Vietnam. I'm just dreaming I'm back in Vietnam. Where's my body? It's in bed. I'm safe. This is just a hallucination. And actually, it's a hallucination that I can change. And then they could transform the nightmare into something peaceful, or actually we found the best results, and I think Rob would like this, was not to transform the nightmare into something peaceful, but to walk straight towards the nightmare, not changing it, knowing that it's just a figment of the imagination and that nothing can hurt us. The results we got from this study, which again I wish Rob was able to see, were so remarkable that the scientists running the study, we did it with a scientific organization called the Institute of Noetic Sciences in America, thought there was a problem with data collection, because we found that 85% of participants at the end of the 1 week study had reduced their PTSD symptoms so drastically that they no longer met the medical criteria of PTSD. So basically, by the end of the week, medically they didn't have post-traumatic stress disorder anymore. At the beginning of the week, their symptoms were tested, looking at symptoms like flashbacks, panic attacks, anxiety, as well as nightmares. And by the end of the week, they were tested again, and there was a severe reduction. In fact, the results were so outlandish that we struggled to get it published until we did it again. So we've done this twice now. This time we did a 100-person randomized controlled study, and we got the same results. Around 80% of people by the end of the week no longer had post-traumatic stress disorder. And then once we had that, then it was published. So we know without doubt that lucid dreaming is one of the most powerful interventions for post-traumatic stress disorder currently available. It's free. You do it in your sleep. It's non-addictive, it's non-invasive, it's non-medical. It kind of sounds too good to be true, but it is true. I've seen it. But of course, it takes effort to learn how to become lucid, but it is possible for people to do. And the why of lucid dreaming? Well, again, as we said, to work with trauma and PTSD, as we mentioned already, to do your spiritual practice in your dream, to do your mindfulness, to do your, if you do sadhana practice, whatever it is, do your spiritual practice in the lucid dream. As the great Lama Namkhe Nobu once said, 1 moment of spiritual practice in a lucid dream is equal to a 1 week retreat in the waking state. It's said that in the lucid dream you have 7 times the power of mind. In the death states you have 9 times the power of mind, but in the lucid dream state you have 7 times the power of mind. So all spiritual practice done in this state is said to be times by 7. I remember here actually, Alan Wallace was teaching at one of the Mindfulness Association events, and he very kindly pulled me up on a couple of things in my talk, and one of the things he said was, Charlie, they don't mean 700%. And I said, oh, what, when they say 7 times? He went, yeah, like 7 times is a Tibetan phrase that means kind of like loads. You know, if you say like to your lover, like, oh, how much do you love me? It's, oh, 7 times I love you. He said, actually, it's probably more than 700%. It means like loads. It means very, very powerful. So again, from Rob, through lucid dreaming, we experience the realization that what we thought to be real is not actually real. And so we're no longer experiencing the ignorance of the illusion. That's such a big quote. Let's unpack this. Through lucid dreaming, we experience the realization that what we thought to be real is actually not real. And so we are no longer experiencing the ignorance of the illusion. This is a taste of awakening. So much in Dharma circles and in mindfulness, we come across these terms, ignorance and illusion, right? Ignorance and illusion, and also wisdom and insight. And what Rob was saying there is, when you become lucid in a dream, you are transforming ignorance into wisdom. Because a non-lucid dream in the Tibetan system is called a dream of ignorance. It's not that like ignorance means you didn't go to a good school or something, you're not educated. Ignorance is not knowing what really is. So a non-lucid dream, any dream where we are not lucid, is a dream of ignorance because we don't know what really is. So once we become lucid, we are transforming ignorance into wisdom. Wisdom is knowing what really is. So the moment we become lucid, ignorance is transformed into wisdom, and illusion is transformed into insight. Because of course the dream is illusory, but we don't know that. Think about it, when you fall asleep at night, you start hallucinating, and you create hallucinations that are so convincing you believe them to be real until your alarm clock goes off in the morning. That is a deeply psychedelic experience, and it seems crazy that we accept it as normal. Like, you go to sleep at night and you hallucinate for like 8 hours. You wake up in the morning, your partner says, "How did you sleep?" And you go, "Yeah, good." Like, what? No, it's not I slept well. It's, yeah, I was hallucinating for like 3 hours of those 8 hours. Do you want to learn, like, what can these hallucinations tell us about the state of our mind? So much. So much, because those hallucinations are, of course, based on the internal environment of our mind. So simply become lucid is to transform ignorance and illusion. Let's move this into the more spiritual aspects here. So Lama Yeshe, in the West, most people, even Buddhists, have not fully understood the real potential of lucid dreaming. But once people know how important it is, everyone will practice it. I'm still waiting. I asked Lama Yeshe more recently, like, if lucid dreaming is so great, then why isn't it taught in Dharma centers? Why doesn't every Dharma center have a lucid dreaming teacher? And he said something quite interesting. He went, "Charlie," I'll do his voice because I love him, right? Not because I'm laughing at him, because I love him. "Charlie, Dharma in West still very young. I'm still trying to get people to meditate 20 minutes, let alone do this, do that, lucid dream." So just that, as if like, actually with time, you might have lucid dreaming taught in every Dharma center. As Lama Yeshe says, dream yoga has been practiced for over 1,000 years, and the stability of the lucid dream is the foundation of dream yoga. I don't think I've ever said this publicly, this one. I once asked Rob about people were teaching Mahamudra, and I said, and he wasn't. Someone else was teaching the course of Mahamudra, and I said, so what is it with the Mahamudra teachings? Like, are you not going to run this course? And I remember he looked at me and said, "I've never taught anything but Mahamudra." And I was like, wow, that's always stuck with me. I've never taught anything but Mahamudra. And if you look at the resting stage that you do in Mindfulness Association, right? And if you've received the Mahamudra teachings, they look very similar at certain points, where just rest, nothing to do, just rest. And I think in many ways, the way that Rob was doing that with mindfulness, he was also doing it in the lucid dreaming trainings, because in the traditional dream yoga teachings, you have these like 4 stages of dream yoga, or in the Padmasambhava dream yoga teachings. They are recognition, which is basically learning to lucid dream, like becoming lucid in the dream, and then transformation, multiplication, and unification. And actually looking back on it, I realized that Rob was teaching all of these stages, but not calling it dream yoga, in the same way as he was often teaching Mahamudra and not calling it that. So I want to look at this because I found these quotes that are really, really interesting here. So Rob, on the recognition stage, through lucid dreaming, we experience the realization that what we thought to be real is actually not real. And so we're no longer experiencing the ignorance of the illusion. This is a taste of awakening. So here he's directly talking about this recognition state that we have, that by becoming lucid, as we said before, we're transforming ignorance and illusion. Also, I spoke to him once and said, actually I spoke to Lama Yeshe about this. I said, to learn dream yoga, do we need to do the Tibetan techniques? And he said, learn whatever techniques can help people to become lucid. Once you are lucid, then dream yoga begins. That's a very interesting quote, because I think so many of us get stuck on the fact that, oh, you can only learn the dream yoga practice in the 4-year retreat. In this lineage, yes, true. However, the practices that you can do once you are lucid can be full-on dream yoga practices that don't require that training and retreat. And in fact, Lama Yeshe said, he basically talked about, he said, you teach people the basics and then you send them to me. I can help them liberate in the bardo. as if like we've created this thing that we can do where we can learn the basics of dream yoga together, or the basics of lucid dreaming, and then you can go to a master like Lamiyesh and he can give the further instructions. These stages of dream yoga too fall perfectly into Rob's idea of shadow work, because the second thing that you're told to do once you become lucid is transformation. But it's not transformation of the dream state yet, it's transformation of fear. So interesting that these ancient dream yoga teachings tell us that once we become lucid, one of the first things we should do is transform fear. And they're very straight about this. It says, like, jump into fire knowing that you cannot be burnt. Walk into fire knowing that you cannot be burnt. Jump from a high place knowing that you cannot die. Call forth a tiger into the dream. And then it gives you these options. You can transform the tiger into a Buddha. You can make friends with the tiger, or you can ride the tiger like a friendly horse. They're essentially telling us to do shadow work. Go into the lucid dream and do scary stuff. Why? Because fear is such a block to our spiritual growth, such a block to our psychophysical system, that until we have integrated that fear, shame, and trauma that make up the shadow, we may not have the requisite energy required for the later stages of dream yoga. And Rob was all about this. Some of the first things he told people to do in their lucid dream was to face their fear. The next stage is multiplication. So once you've faced your fear in the lucid dream, once you've transformed your shadows, the next thing it translates as multiplication. It says things like, make big things small, make small things big. It's essentially about doing impossible things. And I remember I always struggled with it because I thought, isn't it just an ego trip, going into the lucid dream and doing impossible things? And Rob was like, no. The reason you do impossible things in the lucid dream is to remove the shackles of impossibility that the ego mind has over us. Like, for example, we have only known a world where walls are solid, right? Every wall we have touched has been solid. So one of the things we can do in this multiplication stage in dream yoga is to walk through a wall. And this quote from Rob, it's only doubt that stops us walking through walls, Charlie. There's a second part to that. I said, oh yeah, because in the lucid dream you can get stuck in the dream if you're stuck in the wall if you feel doubt. And he went, I wasn't talking about the dream. And of course there's that famous story that I'm sure many of you heard from Rob about him, someone in South Africa seeing that someone had tried to walk through a wall in one of the monasteries that they went to in Tibet. And it turns out this place had been attacked by the Chinese, and as if it was the last resort that one of these monks had was to try to escape, to walk through the wall, and their clothing had been found like enmeshed into the dry stone wall as if they had tried to move through that. And Rob was telling me that story, and I had wanted to try it in the lucid dream. And then Akon Rinpoche, one of the last teachings he gave me before he died, was very simple teaching on lucid dreaming, but it was made of 3 words, which for Akon Rinpoche was sometimes a long conversation. He was a man of very few words. And I asked him for an instruction, what should I do in my next lucid dream? And he said, walk through wall. And I remember what Rob had said, okay, it's only doubt that stops us walking through walls, so if I can go into the lucid dream and have no doubt, maybe I can get through the wall. And the first time I tried this, I became lucid. I knew I was dreaming. I knew my body was asleep in bed. I thought, oh, right, I've got to find a wall to go through. So I approached this wall in the lucid dream, and I walked through it, and bam, I hit my face. And it's solid, and I wake up. And I thought, but that's crazy. I knew I was dreaming, so I knew that wall didn't exist. So why couldn't I walk through it? A couple of weeks later, I got lucid again. I was in the lucid dream. I found a wall. I thought, right, I've got to walk through this. I did the reality checks, which are ways to tell if you're dreaming or not. So I knew I was definitely dreaming. I go towards this wall and I tap on it. And it's solid. But I know that I'm dreaming. I think how is it solid? I know that this is made of mind. I know it's not real. And then I reminded myself of that. I went, hang on, this wall doesn't exist. I'm in a lucid dream right now. It's made of nothingness. And then I could put my hand through the wall. But it was like it had some form, some texture. It was like liquid concrete. So I'm putting my hand through this wall and I thought, oh, this is so cool. I can actually get through this wall. And again, remember, it feels like liquid concrete. So I'm going through here, and then just at this moment, I have this moment of doubt where I think, what if the concrete goes into my mouth and like it kind of chokes me? I don't know why I thought that, but I just thought that. What if the concrete goes in my mouth and I choke? And as soon as I thought that, the wall re-solidified. So now I'm stuck in this wall, half in, half out of that, and I wake up. And I thought Rob's right. It's only doubt that stops us walking through walls. The moment I experienced doubt, the wall re-solidified and I was stuck within it. A couple of weeks after that, I tried again. And this time I became lucid. I looked at the wall. I reminded myself, this wall is not real. I have no doubt that this wall is not real. Bam! And I could run through it. And what amazing teaching from Akon Rinpoche, right? In 3 words, he's given a teaching on form and emptiness and form. And it made me think that real teaching was not just a lucid dreaming teaching, it was about the waking life. How many times are we blocked by the walls of our own self-doubt, the walls of our own limitations, the walls of our own bullshit? But that actually, if we can have no doubt that these are illusory limitations, we can go through them. And unification. Again, so many of these dream yoga teachings cannot be taught outside of retreat and can only be taught by a qualified lama. But one of the great things that Rob Nairn did, popularize in his book, Living, Dreaming, Dying, was letting people know that there actually is a dream yoga practice that everybody can do, Buddhist or non-Buddhist. And that is the practice of Chenrezi within the lucid dream. And I've really tried to make sure people know this because it means that actually all of us can do a really incredibly powerful spiritual practice in the lucid dream, even if we haven't had teachings on dream yoga. It clearly states that you can, even without initiation, in your lucid dream, you can say the mantra of Chenrezi. And if you know how to do the puja of Chenrezi that we'll be doing tonight, you can essentially do that same visualization in the lucid dream. And the self-manifestation as well, which is a really powerful experience to have. So again, if you manage to have 2 lucid dreams tonight, and maybe the first one, do your mindfulness practice, the second one, say Om Mani Padme Hum. See what happens, see if you can visualize Chenrezi in the dream, see if you can manifest your Buddha nature into this form. So again, when I look back at Rob's teachings, I realize he was teaching so much more than lucid dreaming. He was always finding a way to teach deep teachings in a really accessible way. This is some kind of teaching on lucid dreaming. I'm actually going to skip this because I want to give you a practical thing to do at the end rather than just learning this stuff. Oh, this is a nice one from Rob too. Although Charlie talks about lucidity like an everyday occurrence, just to have one intentional lucid dream in your lifetime is a big achievement. And Rob was so good at that, you know, really making everybody feel that they were welcome. That even something as sometimes seemingly difficult as lucid dreaming, just having one lucid dream could be a wonderful achievement. Lucid dying, I know we're looking at dying later on, but I'd be amiss not to touch on this because Rob was all about this. All the lucid dream training that he offered me anyway was always couched in this idea that we're doing it for preparation for death. Lama Yeshe, if you can remember to recognize the dream consistently, then death means nothing to you because you can recognize the death bardo as a dream and then you can be with Buddha. So there's this idea in Buddhism as a whole, of course, that when we die, we're reincarnated. We come back and we do this again. And in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a lot of teachings on the fact that we're not just instantly reborn, though it can happen, but in most cases, when we die, we enter an intermediate state called the bardo. Bardo means like place in between. And it's said that the bardo state is a dreamlike hallucinatory experience that the mind stream enters into once it is separated from the gross corporeal form at the point of death. Dreamlike and hallucinatory. So Lama Yeshe has been very clear on this. He said, if you want to know how you will die, look at how you sleep and dream. Same. Most of us sleep and dream unconsciously. And unfortunately, that means most of us will die in the same way. But if we can train our mind while we're awake to recognize dream as dream and to know sleep as sleep, then when the dreamlike apparitions of the bardo arise at the point of death, we can recognize them too. In the same way as we go, aha, I'm dreaming, we'll have some sort of recognition that goes, aha, I'm dead. And that if we could have that recognition, this could lead to full spiritual enlightenment. And again, Rob was very clear on this. In the death bardos, our enlightened reality appears to us over and over again. And if the bardo mind can focus sufficiently to recognize the experience for what it is, the result will be immediate enlightenment. So this idea, if we can become lucid in the after-death states, then it could lead to immediate enlightenment. The mind is 9 times stronger in this state. So if we're able to focus on spiritual truth, it will immediately be drawn into it, experience it, and be liberated into awakening. All of the teaching that Rob was giving on lucid dreaming and conscious sleeping, which of course he was giving way before I came along. The reason I got into Rob Nairn was because he was one of the few people talking about this. You know, that's why I started going to his workshops and retreats, and then eventually we began working together. Again, a bit like the mindfulness and the Mahamudra, again, when Rob was encouraging people to learn lucid dreaming, it wasn't just for fun. It was because he knew that this would help them prepare the mind at death, whenever death came. And again, this is the quote from Rob when he was having those PTSD nightmares. At least I'm releasing this stuff now. Far better now than waiting until death. Now I can witness it consciously at least. You know, what a mind. Imagine being in the midst of, what was essentially a kind of mental break and still having the presence of mind to say, thank goodness I'm experiencing this now and not death. I think it's important to talk about this actually, because at the time, a lot of people didn't. And I think it was because out of respect for Rob, but also maybe a misplaced respect in the belief that if Rob Nairn was having some sort of, what was essentially a mental breakdown due to this post-traumatic stress disorder from 40 years coming up, that it meant he had failed somehow. And I think people were very hush-hush about it, thinking that it would somehow reflect badly upon, this, mindfulness, the Mindfulness Association, us as his students. I think we really need to reframe that, because I was very close to Rob when he was in that kind of breakdown state, and at no point did he lose the awareness of the view. He allowed it to happen. I remember him clearly saying to me, Charlie, this is my dark night of the soul, but I am processing this now. So yes, he went through this traumatic experience, but he did it with such a mind. At no point did I lose my faith in Rob seeing him in that state. In fact, if anything, the faith grew stronger. Yeah. I once asked Rob, so if we can go into the lucid dream and train in doing the Chenrezig practice, saying the mantras, and if the lucid dreaming is training us for conscious dying, what would happen if you became lucid in the death bardos and were able to say Om Mani Padme Hum, or have a thought of Chenrezig? And again, this one was definitely over wine, I remember it. It was so dramatic. He kind of paused and put down his wine glass and said, if you were able to think of Chenrezig just once in the death bardos, he would appear before you, take you by the hand, and guide you to the pure realms of enlightenment. Rob's death was a very ordinary death, just like Buddha. We don't think of that, do we? The death of Buddha, died of dysentery. And not a kind of a Hollywood death, right? He died because Buddha was a human. And Rob died a very human death too. And yet, in that very human death that Rob died, think how many times Rob had done Chenrezig practice. How many times he had said that mantra. Would there not have been a moment where he did think of Chenrezig in his dying moments? Absolutely. And he was clear that if you can have the thought of the Buddha, or of the teacher, or of Akon Rinpoche, his guru, in that moment of death, then enlightenment would open up for him. So by the time Rob died, it may have seemed outwardly a lot of his mindfulness awareness had gone too. He was very aged. But the practice he had done, that years and years of training, that's what counts. A bit like a martial artist who hasn't thrown a punch for years, but has done hundreds and hundreds of hours of training, and then is in a combat situation and manages to protect themselves perfectly. I think so too with spiritual practitioners. You know, Rob had done so much training that I'm sure at the moment of death, he was able to think of the Guru, he was able to think of Chenrezig. No talk about Rob would be complete without looking at the hypnopompic. So the hypnopompic, we have these states of mind on either sides of sleep. One called the hypnagogic, which is the falling asleep state, and we're going to explore that in a minute because we will have enough time to do this guided yoga nidra practice. So the hypnagogic is the drowsy doorway that leads from wakefulness into sleep. And the hypnopompic is the waking up state. Now this one most people are less aware of, simply because we wake up so quickly. Most of us wake up in an alarmed state. There is no greater symbol of our society's lost regard of the sacred nature of sleep than the alarm clock. Like, when did we sign up for that? When did we go, yeah, the best way to start our day is in a state of alarm with adrenaline and cortisol in our bloodstream? Like, what are we doing? You know, if you remember one takeaway from this talk, please in the break, get your phone and set your alarm to a piece of music or bird song or Buddhist chants or Radio 4, anything that's not meep, 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 meep. What a way to start our day, right? But if you are able to wake up in a non-alarmed state, have you noticed there's that kind of bardo period, intermediate period between, like, you've stopped dreaming, your eyes are still closed, you can hear the sounds in the bedroom, you can feel your body in the bed, but you wouldn't say you're awake yet. It's that kind of bardo between it. That's the hypnopompic. And Rob Nairn was a hypnopompic specialist. You know, he spent so much time in that state. And he would often say, he said, I wrote 2 books in the hypnopompic state. And when we started working together, I kind of called him up on it, basically. I remember I was quite young and I said, I've heard you say that a couple of times, like, what do you mean? Like you wrote 2 books in the hypnopompic. How? Where was your laptop, you know? And he went, well, of course I didn't write the books in the hypnopompic, but he said the titles of both my 2 books, so Living, Dreaming, Dying, and I guess Tranquil Mind, was that the first one? He said the titles came to him in the hypnopompic state, and the framework for each of those books, like the chapter titles and the framework of the book, came to him in the hypnopompic. So it's a real gold mine, this state. It offers a level of profound psychological exploration unmatched by any other state of mind. I remember Rob being so pleased when one day I presented to him this Dzogchen text where I had found them describing the hypnopompic in these terms. Rob had always had this idea. Actually, this is an interesting quote from Rob. It's the only time I ever heard him kind of not speak against the lamas, but say something that would be confrontational. He said, the hypnopompic state is a profound state of mind. If you can meditate in it, there is a deep profundity there. And that is the truth. And any lama, if any lama tells you different, they're wrong. He was, the only time I heard him say something like that, but he was so, he felt it was so true that the hypnopompic state held these really powerful states of mind. And some years later, I found a Dzogchen text that really said this. It said, the mind upon awakening, when sleep and dream has ceased, but full wakefulness has not yet dawned. Come on, that's the hypnopompic. When sleep and dream has ceased, but full wakefulness has not yet dawned. That's the hypnopompic state. They are directly talking about that. It says, in that state lies the potential for the most profound state of meditation. Basically exactly what Rob was saying. And I printed it out for him, and the joy on his face, this sense of like, yes, I knew it. I knew I was onto something. And actually they've been onto it thousands of years before him. But you know, he came to that conclusion himself. So the hypnopompic, I know Rob would want me to tell you this. Please, tomorrow morning, wake up slowly. If you intend to wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and you do have to wait with the alarm, set your alarm for like 6:50. And then when the alarm goes off, a nice piece of music, not anything rattling, keep your eyes closed if you can. Doesn't matter if you need to open them briefly, keep them closed. Hit the snooze button. And then just drop back for 10 minutes into that in-between state. Don't fall back asleep. Just rest there and just see what's there. Because Rob used to say, you get to see the mind at its cleanest. That sleep and dream is like spring cleaning for the mind. But as soon as we wake up, the ego comes back online. But there's a little point in the hypnopompic where you can see the mind really clean, but the ego hasn't quite woken up yet. It's still kind of drowsy. That's the hypnopompic. And if you can rest there, there are such amazing things you can find there. Final teaching. This is really interesting. I have never discussed this before. This is, although I have put this in my new book. So hopefully people will read about this now. when Rob died, for the first few weeks, I was really trying to communicate with him through the lucid dream state. Because remember, as we said earlier, like in the lucid dream state, you're said to have 7 times the power of mind. And when someone is in the bardo, the after-death states, which can last up to 49 days, they have 9 times the power of mind. Ergo, the easiest way to communicate with a recently dead loved one is through the lucid dream state. So I was really trying to get in contact with him. And I couldn't even dream about him. He just wasn't coming into my dreams. Nothing was happening until the 25th of October. So I think this was about 25 days after Rob died. Remember, like something around 20-something days around Rob died. And I was on this retreat with this wonderful Dharma teacher called Delton Armstrong. And during the day, we're doing a lot of metta practice. And I was doing all my metta for Rob. So I was spending a lot of time visualizing Rob and sending him love, sending him love, sending him love. And then at night, I became lucid. And it was a very powerful dream. I became lucid and I was at the Cape Town Samazon. And the dream started, people were kind of milling around going, is it there, is it there, is he still there? And I thought they were talking about Rob Nairn's possessions, like are they still there in the place? And then I realized they were talking about Rob. And I went into the room and they were all gathered around Rob. So Rob was sitting, not on like a throne, but on like a high seat, like that. And everyone was sitting in a circle on the floor, like maybe, I don't know, 10 people around him like that. And I realized that he was about to give a teaching. And then it hit me and I was like, what? Rob's dead. So that means I'm dreaming. I'm lucid. And I became lucid. And to see him there, it was almost cliched in the fact he looked so healthy. You know how people say when you see people in near-death experience and stuff, they always look in their healthiest state. It was like that. Rob looked like healthy, about kind of maybe 20 years younger than he did before he died. And I looked at him, I knew I was dreaming, and then I was kind of crying. I said, Rob, one more teaching. Give me one more teaching. What's the final teaching? And then he looked at me. And I know this doesn't exist, this word, but this is what he said. He looked at me, he said, the most important teaching is the aphrodescence of kindness. And I repeated it back to him. I said, the aphrodescence of kindness. And I didn't know what it meant. And I went, is it kindness? Kindness. And he went, kindness, Charlie, kindness. And that for him was the final teaching. And I think that was all of Rob's teachings, right? Everything was about kindness. You know, starting the Mindfulness Association, all of these teachings, wasn't it always about being kind to ourselves? Learning how to be kinder to our emotions, to be kinder to others, to be kinder to the world. And in this lucid dream, it was kindness. Now, I don't know if it was actually Rob, or just my projection of my mind imagining Rob. Either way, I don't know if it really matters. What matters is that for me, the essence of Rob, that final teaching of his, was kindness. And I think that's a wonderful final teaching for him to give. So, there's some more stuff we could do, but let's not. Let's do something. You know, Rob always liked to do, right? Not just the talk. So we've talked enough. And I hope I brought some of Rob into the space. And it was great to be able to look through all my books and see how much I quoted him. Like how much he appeared in these books. And hopefully how much people have come into contact with his work through them. And through this, through Mindfulness Association. You know, a lot of you are teachers. Every time you teach, you're spreading Rob's teachings. This is the lineage. You know, lineage is sometimes different when it's not in a Buddhist context. But in this context, you're the lineage. This is it. This is what's left after his death. This is his legacy. Not only his books, but the Mindfulness Association and all of the people that you teach. Everyone you've ever taught settling, grounding, resting with support to, you've taught them something of Rob. You've connected them to Rob Nairn. And by connecting to Rob Nairn, you connect them to Akon Rinpoche and with Lama Yeshe Rinpoche. Again, to the gurus. So this is very good work. And it's so good that you're still doing this. It would have been so easy that with Rob's death, maybe, I don't know, Mindfulness Association stops. I mean, it couldn't. For so many years, it's been not out of Rob's hands, but very blessingly given over to Heather and the team. But still, maybe with the loss of Rob, I don't know, this could have stopped, but it didn't stop. It continued. So please do continue, because this is his legacy, this is his lineage. So what I'd like us to do now, for the last half hour or so, is there's a practice called hypnagogic mindfulness. Why is it called that? Why isn't it called yoga nidra? Because Rob made an interesting point when I was looking to get funding for scientific research into lucid dreaming. He said, if you call it yoga nidra or lucid dreaming, you won't get any funding. You need to call it mindfulness of dream and sleep, and you need to call the yoga nidra hypnagogic mindfulness. Rob was always very good on the rebrands, right? And on acronyms and all that kind of stuff. But essentially, this is a yoga nidra practice. And it's a very nice practice. So I'd ask you, if you can, to be lying down. If you don't want to be lying down, that's totally fine. You can do this sitting upright. But allow yourself to get really comfy. And if you want to lie down, then find a place to be comfy now.